The world powers down, the lights go out, the traffic outside fades into a distant whisper, and normal people lay their heads on their pillows and simply disappear into unconsciousness. Their brains accept biological fatigue with an ease that is almost enviable. They rest. The day ends. But not for you. When absolute silence takes over the house, when the screens go dark and the visual distractions finally vanish, that is when your true torment begins. The main engine doesn't shut off. Quite the opposite. Without the chaotic noise of society to numb you, your mind triggers an almost melancholic state of nocturnal hyper-vigilance. It's not a desperate anxiety. It's a solitary watch. It starts with small, almost imperceptible things. Your brain pulls up the file of a mundane conversation you had at 2:14 p.m., a sentence thrown into the wind about the weather or a project at work. But your mind, which is structured to seek answers and patterns, cannot accept the simplicity of that moment. It begins to dissect the exact intonation of the person's voice, the micro-expression they made right before smiling, that slight tremble at the corner of their lips. The irregular breathing pattern. Lying in the dark, you ask yourself, what did they really mean by that invisible pause? Why did their eyes dart to the left for a fraction of a second? You look for logical flaws where absolutely no logic exists. You recycle dead dialogue, testing alternative scenarios with the precision of a scientist in an empty laboratory. What if I had answered that differently? What if their premise is based on a hidden cognitive bias they don't even realize they have? It's not productive. You know that. It is profoundly exhausting. You are squeezing stones until they bleed, trying to force together a puzzle that the universe never even asked you to assemble. Your prefrontal cortex keeps working, processing, devouring your organic energy, racing at 200 miles per hour on a mental highway where you are the only passenger. The hours pass. 3:10 a.m., 3:40 a.m. The boredom morphs into a silent, heavy anguish. You become a hostage to a processor that refuses to enter sleep mode, like a lighthouse that keeps spinning and illuminating an ocean where there are no more ships. You think this is just anxiety. You think it's just another night of chronic insomnia. But psychiatry has a very specific name for this solitary engine that refuses to shut down. And when you finally understand what it is trying to do to you, the way you see yourself and your entire life changes forever. What you experience during these long nights of isolation is not a character flaw. It is incredibly important that you understand this. And above all, forgive yourself. It is not an antisocial personality trait. It is not intellectual arrogance, nor is it mere free-floating anxiety. Cognitive neuroscience has already mapped this structural anomaly of yours and given it an exact, almost poetic name, a hyperactive default mode network, or DMN. The DMN is the neurological grid that automatically turns on when you are not focused on any external task. When a person of average intelligence sits in a chair and does absolutely nothing, their DMN enters a peaceful resting state. The brain pauses like a soft breath, saving vital energy for the next day. But your system simply does not comprehend the biological concept of rest. For you to understand the gravity, but also the tragic beauty of your condition, the metaphor must be precise. Imagine that your brain is, quite literally, a Formula One engine. It was meticulously sculpted by a genetic lottery to process dense data, calculate complex mathematical probabilities, and solve problems at speeds that other people can't even begin to follow. But normal society locked you inside a tiny, white-walled garage and bolted the door. What happens when you turn on a high-combustion engine inside a confined space and step heavily on the gas without having an infinite racetrack to burn off that monumental power? It doesn't rest. It slowly melts. This constant hypervigilance, this uncontrollable, pathological need to seek logical patterns where there is nothing but randomness causes a devastating internal combustion. The engine overheats in the empty garage. This is exactly why you wake up feeling a chronic burnout, an almost physical weight in your joints and eyes, even after spending 8 hours in bed. Your brilliant intelligence is devouring its own organic energy just to stay running in the void of your bedroom. You have become a victim of your own advanced hardware. And when you try to take this overheated, exhausted engine out into the social world, the melancholy solidifies in an even harsher way. Average minds interact to exchange affection, to laugh, to share human warmth. You, however, interact by decoding data. In a simple hallway conversation, your brain dissects the body language, the vocal inflections, and the omitted truths of every single individual in the room, all at the same time. A mundane trip to the grocery store requires the processing power of a supercomputer. Science brilliantly explains why you feel like you don't fit into this world. But there is a side effect to this hypervigilance that major academic studies prefer not to mention between the lines. There comes a silent stage where your intelligence ceases to be a tool of liberation and becomes, quite literally, a maximum security prison. where you are the only inmate and, tragically, the only warden. The practical result of living with this engine constantly redlining day after day isn't that vibrant, heroic genius that movies and TV shows like to portray. The reality is much quieter. The result is a profound existential boredom, a melancholy that settles in the pit of your stomach and never leaves. Your brain recognizes patterns so quickly, so far in advance, that life simply loses its element of surprise. You suffer from a modern variation of the so-called Cassandra syndrome, the mythological curse of being able to predict the future, but being eternally forced to watch the tragedy unfold in slow motion, with no one believing your warnings. When you understand human psychology at a glance, people, no matter how much you love them, ultimately become predictable algorithms. You sit at a table with friends and foresee the end of a romantic relationship in its second week, just by reading the imperceptible micro-expressions the couple exchanges between sips of wine. You guess the painful ending of the story in the first 10 minutes of the conversation. You know exactly what your best friend is going to say, how they will justify themselves long before they even open their mouth to take a breath. And that hurts in a way that no one can ever document in a medical chart. It is an immense loneliness, even when surrounded by people. To keep from losing your mind completely to this premonitory silence, you do what every gifted, kind-hearted mind desperate for affection ends up doing. You create a character. Clinical psychology calls this painful process masking, social masking. You put on a soft, understanding mask every single day before leaving the house. You laugh at jokes you didn't find the least bit funny, just to make the other person feel good. You fake surprise when hearing stories whose outcomes you deduced hours ago. You, deliberately and compassionately, lower your own IQ in public. You dim your own light, just so you don't scare off the normals with the sheer depth of your internal ocean. You sabotage yourself daily, hiding your true nature, just to earn the right to be loved, to belong to a group. But the exhaustion of living as a kind-hearted imposter inside your own mind extracts a brutal toll. You climb all the way to the peak of the mountain of rationality, thinking you'll find the answers for humanity there, only to discover that there is absolutely nothing up there but cold wind and absolute silence. And it is exactly at this breaking point, in this abyss of overthinking, that the brilliant mind makes a drastic decision just to survive in the normal world, and ends up generating a fatal diagnostic error, something that traditional psychiatry itself usually treats in the worst possible way. You spend your entire life believing that this crushing burnout is just the inevitable weight of your intelligence. You convince yourself that the isolation and the melancholy are the fair biological price you have to pay for being faster, more perceptive, and more analytical than everyone else. But what if I told you, with all the empathy in the world, that mainstream psychiatry has been lying to you this whole time? What if this nocturnal hyper-vigilance, this physical inability to shut the engine off at 3 a.m., and this pathological need to wear a social mask just to be accepted are not merely symptoms of a high IQ? There is an invisible, dark, yet profoundly liberating line that separates genius from completely silent neurodivergence. What you call pure analytical intelligence, what you call just the way you are, might actually be the masked and exhausted symptom of severe ADHD or high-functioning autism that was never, ever diagnosed in your childhood. Genius and disorder inhabit the exact same dark room in your mind, sitting side by side, confusing the doctors and confusing you. The real question you need to ask yourself right now isn't how smart you are, or how much you know about the world. The real question is, who are you truly when the social mask finally drops and you are all alone in your room? That is our File 02, and it explains, once and for all, why you feel like a fraud every single day of your life.